Hello all of you beautiful people, Jules here for WhatCulture.com. So, multiplayer modes can be a great way for developers to prolong the life cycle of their games, keeping players coming back time and time again. But this has sometimes led to out-of-place multiplayer modes being forced into series that were predominantly a single-player experience, thus changing the tone somewhat. And while some of the modes we'll be covering today were decent, they did feel kind of out of place. So let's take a look at them. As I'm Jules, this is WhatCulture.com, and these are 10 video games that probably should have ditched their multiplayer modes. Number 10. Far Cry 3. A first-person shooter and a competitive multiplayer mode should go hand in hand, right? Well, that's clearly what Ubisoft Montreal thought when creating Far Cry 3. The game received excellent reviews for its vibrant world and addictive gameplay loop, not to mention its infamous antagonist, and it's arguably the best in what has become a rather long-in-the-tooth series. Unfortunately, the multiplayer mode, while good for a few hours of mindless fun, failed to recapture that magic that was seen in the solo campaign and therefore was largely forgettable. The multiplayer offered the standard competitive fare, as well as a cooperative mode that allowed players to work their way through specifically curated maps together. While neither of these modes were particularly bad, they just became largely forgettable during a time where the offering of multiplayer shooters included the likes of Call of Duty, Black Ops 2, Battlefield 3, and Halo 4. Therefore, in multiplayer terms, the game was little more than a generic FPS. Number 9. BIOSHOCK 2. Now, similar to Far Cry 3, BIOSHOCK 2 was released during a time where every first-person shooter had a multiplayer mode, so it should come as little surprise that the second entry into the beloved BIOSHOCK series also featured a competitive multiplayer mode. A series best known for its twisting narrative and atmospheric worlds, this was met with either skeptical curiosity or flat-out indifference when it was first announced. The series wasn't exactly known for having tight gameplay mechanics and smooth gunplay, if we're being honest, so making a multiplayer mode seemed an odd choice considering Call of Duty and Halo had recently redefined the expectations for multiplayer shooters in general. Despite this, the mode turned out surprisingly well, even featuring some nice story elements in the mode that would actually appeal to series fans. However, it ultimately never took off, as it just wasn't what fans wanted from a BIOSHOCK game, and it also unfortunately suffered from a number of bugs that hindered the experience. And the fact that it was scrapped when the game was remastered in 2016 kinda says it all, really, doesn't it? Number 8. God of War Ascension. Now, it might come as a surprise to some that the God of War series at one point actually included a multiplayer mode, especially for those only really familiar with 2018's exceptional reboot. But this was indeed the case with the PlayStation 3's God of War Ascension, which featured a Spartans vs Trojans multiplayer mode in addition to its hack-and-slash single-player campaign. The multiplayer had some unique ideas, such as the ability to align with one of the 4 Greek gods, which would determine the skills available and therefore the playstyle to go with, and the fact that players could then engage in combat against one another across a number of modes in wide arenas, and there was even a cooperative horde mode where players teamed up to fight off waves of enemies. But while it did provide some entertainment for a short while, it just wasn't what fans of the series were clamoring for and served as little more than a nice distraction from brutally butchering deities in the main campaign. Many fans consider this the weakest entry in the series, so it begs the question of whether focusing entirely on the single player could have actually helped this entry fare better in the eyes of fans. Number 7. Donkey Kong 64. Now, this entry may result in some hate, as there will likely be a large number of gamers who hold very fond memories of playing the unlockable multiplayer mode in Donkey Kong 64. And for sure, the mode was fun for the time and provided some good laughs in short bursts with up to 4 players. However, it was vastly different to the single-player experience in Donkey Kong's first 3D outing. With 2 modes on offer, Monkey Smash and Battle Arena, the mode served as little more than a 10-minute distraction when you had friends over. However, with games like GoldenEye, Mario Kart 64, and Mario Party already on Nintendo's 3D system, there were far better games that could be played with friends. The original manual for Rare's platformer even jokingly made reference to the fact that the game featured a multiplayer mode that was likely thrown in at the last minute and was likely average at best. Self-deprecating jokes aside, the multiplayer mode provided a short fun time but was ultimately lacking compared to the games on offer elsewhere on the platform. Number 6. Assassin's Creed Brotherhood. Now, multiplayer in an Assassin's Creed game today seems like a bit of a weird dream, but there was a time where this was actually amazing and included within this sneak and stab franchise. The mode was unique and Ubisoft definitely put in the work here, but it's a shame that outside of small groups, it never really took off in its own right, and the series is still remembered only for its single-player experience. The mode saw players trying to hunt down others or an AI-controlled target while also being hunted by another player, and you'd need to figure out ways to hunt your target while maintaining a low profile and blending into the surroundings. The mode was good fun, but unfortunately, apart from a small dedicated group, it never really served as much more than an icon on the main menu. The decision to hide some achievements and trophies behind the multiplayer mode as well also angered some fans who only enjoyed the series for its single-player experience. And the reason that it's on this list, well, it's because Ubisoft decided to drop it themselves, and now all we've got is the memory of this being great, but not being able to play it in this day and age. Number 5. Dead Space 2. It should be relatively clear by now that there's a common theme with a number of these entries in this list that are consistent with single-player experiences seemingly having a multiplayer mode shoehorned in for whatever reason. And the next victim of this procedure was Visceral Games' sci-fi survival horror title Dead Space 2. Featuring a multiplayer mode that played as, well, little more than a Left 4 Dead clone, the game featured a team of 4 human players facing off against another 4 players who were playing as the Necromorphs. The mode wasn't inherently bad, but it suffered from balancing issues that often meant higher-ranked players had a much easier time, making it much more difficult for new players to even progress. Couple the balancing issues with an experience that could be found better elsewhere, and it should be little surprise why the competitive multiplayer mode was scrapped for the 3rd entry in this survival horror series. Although, to be fair, what we got for Dead Space 3, just as bad. Number 4. Spec Ops: The Line. Spec Ops: The Line was a nice surprise when the gritty third-person shooter released in 2012, largely due to its single-player campaign, which provided a refreshing take on the horrors and violence of warfare. And you know all about Spec Ops: The Line because this is a WhatCulture list, we've covered it many times already. However, in addition to the stellar solo campaign, the game also featured a very out-of-place multiplayer mode that flew completely in the face of the message portrayed within the game's story. Sadly, the multiplayer in Spec Ops was a rather generic class-based third-person shooter that offered little in the way of anything new compared to other shooters on the market. More than anything though, the whole mode just felt painfully out of place in a game that was aiming to highlight the horror and morality, or lack of warfare. The developers Jaeger also revealed in an interview with Polygon that they didn't want the game to have multiplayer, but publisher 2K insisted on adding the mode, which was created by a separate developer, Darkside Studios. Number 3. Tomb Raider. 2013's reboot of Tomb Raider was an exceptional revival project that breathed life back into a long-standing series in gaming. The title was very well received, as were its 2 sequels. However, this was in large part to the core single-player experience rather than the inclusion of any multiplayer modes. A somewhat puzzling decision at the time, the multiplayer featured some pretty nice ideas, such as the option to set traps for enemies. However, it never really drew a consistent enough player base. Sadly, the experience did contain its fair share of bugs and balancing issues that quickly killed off the community, making it difficult to find enough players for a game. A number of achievements and trophies were hidden behind the multiplayer mode as well, which is often a big no-no when it comes to those looking to 100% their games, particularly when the game is predominantly a single-player experience. It's telling then that Crystal Dynamics made the decision to scrap the competitive multiplayer mode for the 2 sequels, choosing to focus instead on the single-player experience. And it's a choice we're glad they took. Number 2. Batman Arkham Origins. Okay, so hands up who even knew that Batman Arkham Origins even had a multiplayer mode. Anybody? But here's another question. What could possibly go wrong with creating a third-person competitive shooter to include within a game that had become synonymous with its fluid hand-to-hand combat? Well, it turns out that pretty much everything could and did go wrong. The multiplayer mode, while being a nice idea on paper, was clunky and unintuitive and therefore became a subpar experience that could be found executed much better elsewhere. The game pits 2 teams of mercenaries against each other in a third-person shooter, but the twist here is that at the beginning of each game, 2 players are selected to be Batman and Robin to help take on both teams of mercenaries. The concept was a genuinely entertaining take on the cops and robbers or spies versus mercenaries multiplayer mode that had featured elsewhere previously, but unfortunately the novel idea was not enough to save the multiplayer mode, and it was understandably dropped by the series for its next entry, Arkham Knight. And number 1, Dragon Age Inquisition. The decision to add a multiplayer mode to a 100-hour-plus single-player role-playing game is a strange one indeed, and it's still puzzling to this day. However, for some reason, BioWare saw it fit to add a multiplayer mode to the 3rd entry into their sprawling fantasy RPG series. Hardly the draw for those purchasing the game, the multiplayer mode featured 4 players working together, cooperatively to dispatch enemies and complete a linear set of objectives that were completely separate from the main game. The mode was capable of providing some fun in small parts, however it wasn't the reason that the majority of players were here for and therefore was quickly forgotten about. With complaints that even the solo campaign dragged on for longer than necessary due to a significant amount of filler content, I'm looking at you hinterlands, it's no surprise then that players didn't stick around for the multiplayer mode as well. Hopefully BioWare and EA see the light and forego the multiplayer mode in the upcoming Dragon Age 4 in favour of providing a more memorable single-player experience. And there we go, my friends, those were 10 video games that should have ditched their multiplayer modes. I hope you enjoyed that, and please let me know what you thought about it down in the comments section below. As always, I've been Jules. You can go chat to me over on Twitter at RetroJ, or you can swing by Live and Let's Dice, where I do all of my streaming outside of work, and yes, I probably play a few multiplayer games there as well, so you can come along and maybe even play with me. But before I go, I just want to say one thing. Even though we detailed today a lot about multiplayer modes that didn't quite cut the mustard, you should always be looking to go out there and tackle life with a group of friends behind you. And in fact, friends, family, professionals in the support industry, these people care about you and want you to do well, so make sure that you've got your full team lined up before you go out there and smash it like I know you will. As always, I've been Jules. You have been awesome. Never forget that, and I'll speak to you soon. Bye.